So far, I'm still proud about being part of this department. I'll bet you after the group of additional panels that we'll have, or seminars that we'll have today and tomorrow, I'll be popping my buttons. This is just a wonderful place to be. So right now we're going on to the last of the sessions of the day, and it's research on alcohol, drugs, and related conditions. And the first lecture today is going to come from Sandra Brown. And Sandy and I have known each other for a lot of years. And we have collaborated together. We've written papers together. Then I started to look up to her even more as she stepped up to Vice Chancellor for research for the entire campus. That is one challenging job. Thank you for what you've done. And she's a distinguished professor of both psychiatry and psychology, the undergraduate campus as well as the medical school. She oversees the Office of Research Affairs for the entire UCSD. She is a superb researcher, cognition, youth, substances, and if there were two programs, research programs, that I am impressed with in the United States, she heads them both. The first one is the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Consortium, ABCD, where she works closely with Susan Tapert. And the other is the National Consortium on Alcohol and Neurodevelopment in Adolescents, known as NCANDA. Talk about what are you going to say in 15 minutes with all the things that you've done. I'm looking forward to it. So, Sandra Brown.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure it's been a very stimulating day, and I'm excited to have an opportunity to share just a little bit about some of the contributions that I've been involved with here at UC San Diego and nationally. And I always knew I was in the right place when we have a library that is really a Dr. Seuss memorial. And if you're interested in children, that it seems like this must be the right kind of university to be at. So it always has felt like a good fit for me. Mark mentioned that I've had the good fortune of being involved in a variety of different kinds of research, and so I just want to give tribute to those organizations that have funded me over the years. I came to UC San Diego in the mid 1980s. And I had the good fortune of being recruited by Nelson Butters, who was an eminent neuropsychologist and really came to build the programs in neuropsychology here and build on the foundation that had already been here. And he did just that. And he brought stellar researchers like Terry Jernigan and Dean Dellis and Eric Granholm and many, many others who are here. But when I came and had the opportunity to work with someone who was already nationally recognized in the area of addiction, and that's Mark Schuckett. It was a very good fortune for me. And even then, he was known for his low responsivity risk marker research. And he and I did a lot in the area of comorbidity, mental health comorbidities, depression, anxiety, PTSD, in conjunction with alcohol and other drug problems. So I was here in the department for quite some time, and for about 15 years was the chief of psychology at the VA. And it was in that context that we developed a number of training programs and expanded other training programs, really developed what I think is a remarkably unique collaborative team. And so I was here for a few years before I brought as a graduate student Susan Tapert, who is now my esteemed colleague in the works with me as the PI for the NCANDA project. By expanding the clinical programs, it gave us opportunity to bring students in at the undergraduate, the graduate, and the postdoctoral level. under Bob Heaton's leadership for the joint doctoral program, Ed Riley for the training program in addictions. And during that time, I was involved in training over 70 graduate students, postdocs, and junior faculty. And the biggest contribution that I've made to addiction is that 55 of them have had their own grants, and 50 are today in academic research positions. So sometimes it's not what you do personally, but it's the people that you identify that have great talent and can bring that to the field. So what I'm going to talk about today is the adolescent side of my research, because I've always taken a developmental perspective, but much of my work at the VA was done with older adults, of course, folks that we would normally see at the VA. So from an adolescent perspective, teens really are in some ways a different animal. And if we look across species, there are some distinctive commonalities that unfold with the emergence of puberty, in particular risk-taking and increased social drive. But also there are distinctive brain, cognitive, and social behavioral changes that unfold. So it's not at all surprising that the alcohol and drug use patterns of adolescents look quite different than the alcohol and drug use patterns of adults. The impact may be different as well. And it was with this particular developmental focus that I had the good fortune to work on a number of federal initiatives, essentially redefining what a binge is so that there was something that we could call a binge that teens did because they do so much of it. The guidelines for assessment and early intervention for youth, primarily in the primary care setting, an adolescent treatment initiative that was launched by NIAAA, establishing alcohol administration guidelines. Much of that came from my experience with Mark. And then finally, an adolescent alcohol initiative that led to the National Consortium for Alcohol and Neurodevelopment in Adolescents, and then subsequently the Alcohol Brain Cognitive Development Study that I co-direct with Terry Jernigan. Adolescence has not been around in our cultures for a long time. There was nothing like it in the 19th century, and it wasn't until industrialization of the late 19th century where we lost that official transition from childhood to adulthood, and there was an extension of schooling, and where we started to have a blend between the child and adult behaviors. Today, we extend even beyond that through much of the media and the digital age that we have, and cross-culturally what we see is an extension and an emergence into adulthood. So there's a true delay in the full assumption of adult responsibilities now until the mid-20s. And it's interesting to me that that actually fits with with brain development. So I'm especially interested in alcohol, I'll be honest. Other drugs are interesting as well, but I think I'm going to show you a couple things about why I think alcohol is so important. And one of those is that it is the most popular drug, bar none, for adolescents and for adults of all ages. The peak use is in late adolescence and very early adulthood, and that's the peak onset for dependency as well. But teens drink very differently than adults do. They drink about half as often, but when they drink about twice as much. So the average number of drinks that teens actually have is just a little under 5 drinks. So I don't know about people sitting in this room, but 5 drinks for me, and I'm in bed. I'm asleep. But for teens, that's not the case. And we've learned a lot from animal studies about the distinctively different effects of alcohol during the adolescent period compared to the adult period. For example, teens are less sensitive to the sedative effects of alcohol, but more sensitive to memory disruption, impairment in neurotransmission, particularly in the hippocampus and the cortex, and enhancement of social facilitation. And we now know that binges produce long-lasting memory effects when those binges occur in adolescence, and damage to the frontal anterior cortical regions, and also slow down the process of neuronal repair. So there are a variety of things we learned from animal studies that then we started to examine in humans. And one example of that is on the left side of the screen here. We studied abstinent adolescents. There used to be a time when teens would be in treatment programs and monitored for extended periods. And for youth who were abstinent for 3 or 4 weeks, but who had a history of over 100 alcohol use episodes, when we compared them to gender, age, grade, SES, and family history matched teens from the very same communities, what we found is while initially they were able to learn the same amount of material, whether that was a verbal material, like the kind of information you might get in a language arts class at school, or whether it was a nonverbal material, like the way we test in the RAO or spatial visualization kinds of things, that when we tested them just 20 minutes later, they remembered 10% less. So these are children who are learning the same amount. They're 3 weeks sober. They worked really hard to stay sober. And although they learned the same amount initially, they're remembering about 10% less. In the school system, that's the difference between an A and a B and a C and failing. And so you can imagine what that does to someone's self-image, their understanding of their own cognitive abilities, and their expectations and aspirations with regard to school. Well, we've had the good fortune to study youth who have been in treatment programs, and following Mark's leadership, we followed these teens 20 years with continuous grants from NIAAA and from NIDA. And I want to make a couple points going back to this idea that alcohol is a dangerous drug. So youth who abstain from alcohol after treatment for very extended periods of time. The figure on the right shows the patterns over 10 years. Those youth, in fact, look like the age, gender, community, SES, family history risk matches in their environment in terms of their neurocognitive ability. That is, by staying abstinent for extended periods of time, it looks like they recover those neurocognitive skills to the extent and look just like community youth. And by the way, we eliminated community youth who moved into abuse or dependence. But youth, not all youth, and the majority of youth don't stay abstinent for extended periods of time. Some use very heavily, very early, and that would be what we're calling the chronic group that go back to using right away and their neurocognitive skills deteriorate. There are youth who start to stay sober, and then by the late teens, they start to drink and use again, or by their early 20s when alcohol becomes legal, and alcohol use then becomes a trigger for the onset of drug use. And their scores are substantially below the abstaining and community group. But the group I want to point out to you here is this group that only drinks. They aren't even using marijuana. They aren't using stimulants. They just heavy drinkers. And that is an outcome for youth who have a history of alcohol problems and drug exposure. But look at where their neurocognitive functioning is, right in the middle of these polysubstance users. So one way to think about this is that heavy drinking alone can be as deleterious for your neurocognitive abilities as if you are using other substances as well. Kind of a dangerous message because these drinkers only look the same in terms of the percent that have jobs, the proportion that are married, that kind of thing. But neurocognitively, they really look different. So we were interested in looking at whether these differences in functioning were evident early on in the drinking process. And so this set of slides shows that for teens who are in high schools and who have binges recently, at least 3, and who have over 100 use episodes in their lifetime, that they show the same 10% difference in terms of their learning and memory skills early on and the visual problem-solving skills, but they look like, as they remain abstinent, they look like other teens who are not bingers. So, but again, that early on, there are those differences in their neurocognitive performance. So this led us to do some public health work in developing adolescent early intervention programs in schools, where we actually studied across 4 states youth who came voluntarily for high school interventions that were alcohol-focused. Teens will do just about anything for pizza. If you offer pizza, they'll show up. And we were able to show that we could decrease through these brief interventions, cognitive and behavioral interventions, the number of binges and the number of problems. So this cluster of work that focused on differences between adolescents and adults and some distinctive impact differences, but also social processing differences, led NIAAA to begin the process of evaluating neurodevelopment of adolescents to see what's there before drinking occurs and how does that influence the overall process. I have the good fortune of overseeing this project with Susan Tapert. We launched it in 2012 with a pretty stiff competition. It's funded by several national institutes, and it was renewed recently. You can see there are multiple sites around the country. This project focuses on the effects of alcohol on neurodevelopment, timing, dose, and duration effects, malleability of those effects, like what is the recovery that occurs for youth, what are some of the factors that influence the development and the neurocognitive impact, and also what are some of the implications for education and prevention. Now, one of the things I like about this project is that we're using some new technologies. We do all the things that you would expect that are on the left, but some of the new technologies, not just the biosamples part, but we have an app where we're measuring youth self-report of their drinking in the natural environment right now on a once-a-week basis. They're going to be wearing Fitbits, so we'll be able to get their sleep and activity measures, and working to develop nanobioengineered biomarkers. So it's like little patches that you're not aware of really on an ongoing basis, but we'll get continuous reads of their alcohol exposure. Susan, I think, is going to talk tomorrow a little bit about some of the brain outcomes here, but we've seen patterns in terms of changes over 2-year blocks of time where each individual becomes his own and her own control of decrements in gray matter, increases in central white matter. And for those youth who go on to heavy binge drinking, there are greater reductions in gray matter early on. The next thing that unfolded as a result of the success, which I attribute to Susan's scientific leadership here and our coordinating leadership, is that NIDA didn't want to be outdone, so they said they want to follow 10,000 children, and they want to focus on drugs, particularly marijuana. And by the time this got put together, there were 11 institutes from the National Institute of Health and other organizations as well that funded it. You can see the things that we're focusing on because there's such a diversity. It really is the Framingham study for youth. It's coordinated here in San Diego. Terry Jernigan is the PI. I'm the co-PI for this project. But we have sites all across the country, 21 sites in all. We started with 9 to 10-year-olds from public and private schools that are demographically diverse and actually represent the socioeconomics and ethnic distribution of youth in the United States, and we're going to follow them for at least 10 years. Really excited about this because it is population neuroscience. It uses high-quality epidemiology, and we're looking at both genetic and environmental factors. And one of the most pioneering things about this project is we truly are using an open science model. That means any one of you can at any time, as long as you fill out the data use agreement, have access to that data and use it for your own query to answer your own research questions. So rather than talk about some of the specific details, this is where I thought a movie would be better than my words, so take it away.
Move to our special series, Brain Power, today. This morning, new research looking at the teenage brain and the outside influences that could be impacting it, for better or for worse. NBC special anchor Maria Shriver is here. You always fascinate us. And the teen brain, what a mystery.
The teen brain, I know. You have to listen up to this because you'll be dealing with this in not too long. As parents, we all worry about our kids' well-being, but what about their brains? The federal government has launched the biggest study ever of teenagers' brains, looking at how everything from homework to screen time to even how we parent impacts their cognitive health.
They're regular kids taking part in something extraordinary. 9-year-old Nick and 10-year-old Gemma are being followed by researchers for the next decade, part of a revolutionary new study to find out what helps and hurts the teenage brain.
What kind of brain do you think you have?
A very big one. I think my brain is really cool, and it's like the most important part of our body.
It's called ABCD, the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study. Launched by NIH, it will track over 11,000 kids through adolescence, studying how dozens of factors impact their brains: drugs and alcohol, diet and exercise, screen time, academic and social stress, sleep patterns, sibling relationships, even how they're parented. Susan Buchheimer is one of the study's lead investigators.
We can look at boys versus girls. We can look at different socioeconomic status. We can look at different exposures. We can look at kids who are in high-stress schools versus low-stress schools.
In the 10-year study conducted at medical centers across the country, kids get regular physical exams, cognitive tests, and MRI scans. They and their parents also fill out detailed, confidential questionnaires about their habits and lifestyles.
When we see brain changes, we need to know what is the cause of them, when did they start?
Can you see when a kid comes in who's 9, do you already see brain changes? Can you already see anxiety? Can you already see depression?
Today we can't tell, and that's really the purpose of this study.
So you gotta do like one word.
Nick's mom worries about how stress at school is affecting his brain.
Outside home, there's a lot of things that can influence them and their brain and how they're thinking. It could be their teachers, it could be their friends, it could be anybody.
When you're dealing with your friends or you're watching a movie or listening to music, are you aware of your brain responding in those situations?
Oh yeah, like when I'm on my tablet, if I'm on it too long, I'm like, is this gonna do something to my brain, or is this bad for it?
To me, it's a little frightening that we have all of these children today who are spending 10 hours a day in front of a screen for their socialization, and we don't know what's going to happen to their brains or how that's going to affect their relationships when they get older.
The study also looks at the brain effects of extracurriculars. Gemma's dad encourages her to do activities like singing and dancing.
I'd like some backup to know that they really do contribute to good brain development.
You would like to be able to say, look, it's not just me, your dad, telling you to do this. Science shows us that this, in fact, will make you happier, more resilient, stronger.
Exactly.
For participating, kids and parents are both paid several $100s per visit. The study's first results are due out in the next year.
Do you think this study will change the way we educate our kids, the way we parent, the way society looks at the teenager?
I think so. We hope that at the end we'll be able to say children who do these kinds of activities actually end up doing a lot better than children who don't.
In an online poll, we asked viewers to tell us what you're worried most about impacting your kid's brain, and the #1 answer across the board, screen time.
Oh, yeah.
Screen time, yeah. A big difference even just when my kids were little. We said, you know, no phone, no screen time till middle school, and now kids are on screens at 2, 3.
Yeah.
But is it possible in 10 years when they look back at that study, they'll say, hey, that much screen time didn't really do any harm?
They could say that. I don't know. They don't think that's
We spent, I was asking that question. We spent a lot of time watching TV as kids.
Yeah, Carson's like asking for a friend.
Yeah. But you see kids now on the screens at restaurants and in a whole different level than when we were young, which was just a minute ago.
Exactly. And so they participate, they get paid to be in the study?
Yes.
And they're still looking for
They
kids.
are, so we can go to our website and we can find out more about how people can get involved.
Maria, thank you.
Thank you.
Super. Those are studies to be proud of. It's amazing the impact that you will be having through these studies. Just amazing. Prospective work is incredibly difficult to do. Prospective work with adolescents, it makes me smile. I mean, it sounds like an oxymoron, but prospective work with adolescents is extremely, extremely challenging. And I am very excited about the work that will be going on here.